Her chart said her name was Eleanor Gable, but she told me to call her Mrs. Gable, so that is what I did. Her hand was a bird's nest of dry skin and blue veins, and it trembled inside my own. All around us, the pre-op holding area was a sea of noise, with wheels rolling on polished floors and machines beeping their steady rhythms and voices talking in low, serious tones. She was afraid of the surgery, afraid of not waking up, and I could feel that fear coming through her skin right into me. I leaned in close, so my voice would be just for her. I told her about my mother, how she loved to bake lemon cakes, and how the smell of lemons always made me feel safe. I described the whole thing, from sifting the flour to squeezing the fresh juice, and as I spoke, I felt the tiny bones in her hand begin to settle. I promised her I would be there when she woke up. A young man in resident scrubs, the slightly too large kind that told you he was new and probably tired, was watching us from across the bay. He had kind eyes, and his name tag read L. Finch. He gave me a small nod of respect before his father, the great Dr. Alistair Finch, appeared at his side. The air around Dr. Finch was different, thinner somehow, as if he consumed it all for himself. He wore expensive surgical scrubs the color of dark pine trees, and he never looked at me. He pulled his son away with a hand on his shoulder. "Ancillary staff," I heard him say, his voice a low knife meant to cut. "Remember what they're for, son, paperwork and platitudes." An older nurse was replacing an IV bag nearby, and she saw the whole thing, from my gentle talk with Mrs. Gable to Dr. Finch's dismissive words. She had a face full of deep lines, and her shoulders were permanently bent forward from a lifetime of this work. She moved toward me after the Finches were gone. "Don't get too attached." Her voice was worn out, like a piece of old cloth. "In this place, kindness is a liability. The only people who matter are the ones with MD after their name and a 7-figure billing record." I gave her a smile, trying to push back against her exhaustion with my own energy. "I'm not here to bill 7 figures. I'm here to help people." She just shook her head slowly, a sad kind of wisdom in her eyes, and she muttered something to herself as she walked away. "That's what they all say." I knew what she meant, because I saw it every day. I saw the way the system was built on profit and prestige, not on people. It was the reason my mother died, because a doctor was too busy to listen and a hospital was too worried about costs to run one more test. That memory was the fuel I burned every night after my 12-hour shifts were over. Instead of sleeping, I sat at my small kitchen table with a lamp and a textbook, studying healthcare administration, believing I could learn the machine's language well enough to fix it from the inside. Later that morning, I saw Dr. Finch again. He was standing in the middle of the hall with his team of residents, and he was holding a patient chart like a weapon. He was speaking directly to his son Leo, but his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. He was pointing at a line in the chart, his finger jabbing the paper. Leo looked small and pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. I heard him say something about an alternative surgical approach, something less invasive. Dr. Finch's face grew tight with anger. "Let that be a lesson to all of you," he said to the group, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "There is no questioning in my operating room. There is only obedience." He slammed the chart shut, and the sound made a nurse down the hall jump. Then he walked away, a king leaving his court, and the residents scattered like frightened birds. I was finishing my own charting at the nurses' station when I saw them wheel Mrs. Gable toward the operating wing. Dr. Finch was already scrubbed, moving with an impatient energy. He was scheduled to speak at a big hospital fundraiser that evening, a gala for the city's wealthiest people, and he was running behind. I stood for a moment, watching the heavy doors swing shut behind her gurney, and I sent a silent prayer into the cold, clean air. It was less than an hour later that the world broke. A high, frantic alarm started to scream from behind those doors. A code blew. Nurses and doctors began to run. I was frozen at my station, my heart pounding against my ribs. Through a small window in one of the doors, I saw chaos inside the green room. I saw Dr. Finch working frantically over Mrs. Gable, his movements sharp and angry. I saw a junior nurse staring at a vital signs monitor, her face a mask of horror. Then the high, fast beeping stopped, and it was replaced by a single, unending tone. The sound of a flatline. It was a sound that cut through everything else, a sound of absolute finality. The doors opened and Dr. Finch came out, pulling off his mask. His face was granite. He walked directly to the junior nurse who had been watching the monitor. He stood very close to her, so close she had to lean back. His eyes were like ice. "You saw the monitor flicker," he said, his voice quiet but carrying a terrible weight. "A machine malfunction. That's all that happened." He held her eyes, not blinking, not moving, until she gave a tiny, terrified nod. Then he turned and walked away down the hall, leaving the silence and the dead woman behind him. They called me into a conference room later that afternoon. It was a small room with no windows and a heavy wood table that took up most of the space. The air was still and smelled like nothing at all. Dr. Finch was there, sitting at the far end of the table, looking at his clean, perfect fingernails. A man in an expensive dark suit was there too. He introduced himself as Marcus Thorne, the hospital's legal counsel. He had a file in front of him. He opened it and slid a single piece of paper across the polished surface of the table. It was a page from Mrs. Gable's chart, with my handwriting on it. He pointed to one entry. I had logged her pre-op medication, a standard sedative, 10 minutes after I administered it. I was busy calming her down, and I charted it as soon as I left her side. It was a tiny thing, a common thing, on a busy floor. Thorne began to speak in a low, even voice. He told me a story. In his story, my late chart entry suggested a possible medication error. He said this error could have caused an unforeseen complication during the surgery. He said my negligence was the direct cause of a fatal cardiac event on the operating table. Dr. Finch did not look up. He just sat there, letting the lawyer build a new reality out of my one small mistake. Then came the choice. I could sign a document, a non-disclosure agreement. In it, I would accept responsibility for a minor charting infraction. The hospital would let me resign quietly, and they would give me a generous severance package. The Gable family's lawsuit would be directed at a procedural error, and the hospital's insurance would handle it. Or I could refuse. If I refused, the hospital would support the family's malpractice lawsuit with their full legal power, and they would name me as the sole negligent party. They would destroy me. The lawyer slid the NDA across the table. A pen was resting next to it. "Sign it, Miss Rosales," Thorne said, his voice perfectly calm. "Take the money. It's the only good choice you have left." I stared at the pen. My hand was trembling. The promise I made to Mrs. Gable to be there when she woke up was a joke. The system I wanted to fix was now offering me a bribe to help it bury a woman it had killed. My fear was a cold weight in my stomach, but something else was rising up to meet it. A hot, clean anger. A fury so pure it burned the fear away. I looked from the lawyer's empty face to Dr. Finch's bowed head. I pushed the paper back across the table. "I will not sign my name to your lie." The consequences were immediate. Thorne nodded once, as if he expected this. He closed the file. Dr. Finch finally looked at me then, his eyes holding nothing but cold dismissal. I was fired before I even stood up from the chair. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the one I would soon lose. The television was on, and a local news anchor was talking in a serious voice. A picture of me, my nursing school graduation photo, appeared on the screen next to her. The headline underneath it was printed in big, bold letters. Negligent. Aide sued inpatient DE. My public execution had begun. "7 years is a long time to hold a single thought in your head. I learned to make my body thin and hard, a series of straight lines and sharp angles that fit perfectly into the severe dark suits I wore every day. My hair was cut short in a bob that never moved. I erased Elena Rosales and built Elena Martin from the bones of what was left, starting with data entry in a windowless room and climbing over a mountain of medical fraud cases until I became a name whispered in hospital boardrooms. I was the person you called when a problem needed to disappear cleanly and without a fuss. Marcus Thorne sat on the board at St. Jude's, and he called me to his office, a place of dark wood and thick carpet that absorbed all sound. He was an old man with a face that had settled into permanent disapproval. He had been there 7 years ago, and he was the one who signed the papers that buried my life. Dr. Finch has become a liability, he said without any preamble. He's untouchable, arrogant, and his department is a financial black hole. Sooner or later, he will make a mistake so big that even the board cannot hide it. He looked at me, his eyes empty of everything but calculation. You want him? I want him gone without the mess. I will get you the director of risk management position. You will have access to everything. If you succeed, you get your revenge and I get a stable asset. If you fail, I have never met you. On my first day, the tour of the hospital felt like walking through a graveyard. The smell of antiseptic was the same, and the quiet urgency in the hallways was just as I remembered. I was introduced to the surgical department's senior resident, a man who had grown into his face and his white coat. The uncertainty I remembered was gone, replaced with a calm competence, but his eyes were still kind. He did not recognize the woman standing before him. He saw a name on a badge and a severe suit and a face that gave nothing away. He put his hand out for me to shake. Dr. Leo Finch. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Martin. He held my gaze for a moment. I have a feeling you're exactly what this hospital needs. My plan began with a small, precise incision into the hospital's bureaucracy. I found an old, forgotten bylaw in the hospital charter, a rule about mandatory 30-minute pre-operative consultations for any patient classified as high risk. I used patient safety statistics and recent litigation trends to justify its immediate and strict enforcement. This was a direct attack on Alistair Finch's schedule, which was built on volume and speed. He did not come to my office or send an angry email. He made a single phone call. The next day, the mid-level administrator who had signed off on my directive was packing his office into a cardboard box. He had been transferred to a satellite clinic in the suburbs, a known dead end for any career. He looked at me as he taped the box shut, his face pale and slack. "I don't know who you pissed off," he said, his voice low. "But one phone call from Finch, and my career here is over. Be careful." I learned then that I could not fight his influence directly, so I would have to attack the money. I launched what I called a random procurement audit of the surgical department. I knew from my research that Finch exclusively used the newest and most expensive experimental devices, often without the required cost-benefit analysis to justify them. He saw them as artists' tools and a mark of his prestige. I saw them as a weakness in his armor. He tried to have it quashed, using his connections on the finance committee, but I was ready for that. I leaked the preliminary numbers, millions of dollars in undocumented spending, to a medical journalist I had cultivated a relationship with over the years. The article was surgical. It did not mention Finch by name, but everyone in the hospital knew who it was about. The finance committee was forced to issue a formal reprimand to protect the hospital's public image. I was walking through the main atrium when I saw him reading the article on his phone. His expression shifted from simple irritation to a cold, focused fury. He looked up, and his eyes scanned the atrium as if he could feel me watching him. The game had changed. He was hunting me now, even if he did not know who I was. To make him truly vulnerable, I had to take away the people who protected him. His head nurse had been with him for 20 years, and she ran his operating room like a fortress, hiding his mistakes and managing his temper. I spent weeks going through old personnel files and digital time cards until I found what I was looking for. The nurse had been systematically falsifying overtime records for herself and a few other loyalists, a quiet fraud that had gone unnoticed for years. I compiled the evidence into a file and sent it anonymously to the Human Resources Department. The evidence was irrefutable. She was fired immediately. Security escorted her out of the surgical wing. I watched from a distance as she screamed at a silent Alistair Finch, who stood with his hands in the pockets of his white coat, his face a mask of stone. "After 20 years, Alistair, you could have stopped this." He just watched as they took her away. He was alone now and exposed. During all this, Leo and I began to talk. It started with professional meetings about the new protocols, and then it became coffee in the cafeteria. Soon, it was dinner at a small restaurant near the hospital, and then it was dinner at his apartment. He was a good man, burdened by a father he could not respect but still felt compelled to love. He would talk about his frustrations with his father's ego, and his refusal to adapt to modern standards of care, and I would listen, the architect of that man's destruction. His apartment was warm and comfortable, a place that felt like a home, and being there with him felt like breathing air after holding my breath for 7 years. It was a glimpse of a life I thought I had lost forever. The board was pleased with my work. Litigation risk was down, and departmental waste was being cut across the hospital. Marcus Thorne called to congratulate me on my promotion to Vice President of Hospital Operations. My new office had glass walls and a view of the entire city. That same night, Leo gave me a key to his apartment. He said he wanted me to feel like it was my home too. With my new credentials, I had the authority to dig deeper than ever before. I spent a weekend tracking down the junior nurse from the Gable surgery. It was a difficult process of cross-referencing old payroll data with state nursing license renewals until I found her name and a new address in another state. She was retired now. I flew there and sat with her in her small living room. I did not threaten her. I simply laid out 2 futures. In one, she could provide a statement about what really happened that day. In the other, I could use my position to flag her pension records for a deep audit, referencing some procedural irregularities I had already found from her time at St. Jude's. She wrote out a statement on a piece of paper in her shaky hand, a full account of the dropped clamp and the order to falsify the surgical log. I flew back that night and stood in my new office, holding the key to Leo's apartment in my left hand and the folded piece of paper in my right. I had power and I had love, and a cold wave of horror washed over me as I understood I could not possibly keep them both. Alistair Finch was a cornered animal. The small annoyances and the public reprimand had made him paranoid. He started asking questions. He called a contact at the large insurance company where I had spent 3 years building my reputation as an investigator. He asked for a background check on the new VP of Operations, a woman named Elena Martin. The contact owed him a favor, and it was a simple thing to pull my file. The file listed my previous legal surname, Rosales. The name was a key turning a lock in his memory. It connected instantly to a 7-year-old malpractice suit, to a young nursing aide he had crushed without a second thought. The hunter had found his prey. He did not confront me at the hospital. He waited. He chose his time and his place with the same precision he used in the operating room. He came to Leo's apartment on a Thursday night while I was there. We had just finished dinner. He knocked on the door and Leo let him in, surprised. Alistair was holding a thin manila file. He looked at me, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a slow, terrible smile that did not touch his eyes. He handed the file to Leo. "I think you should see this, son." He revealed my true identity, not with anger, but with a calm paternal sadness. He painted a picture of a vengeful, unstable woman who had been fired for gross incompetence. He explained how I had methodically seduced his son, using him as a tool to get close enough to destroy a good man's career. Every strategic move I had made, every protocol I had enforced, was twisted into the action of a psychotic obsession. Leo looked at the old employee record in the file, at the news clippings with my younger, softer face. He looked at me, but he did not see the woman he loved. He saw a stranger, a liar who had built a relationship on a foundation of pure deceit. His face went blank. All the warmth drained out of him, leaving something cold and still. "I need you to leave," he said. His voice was quiet. I stood there, the nurse's testimony a lead weight in my purse, the words to defend myself stuck in my throat. Nothing I could say would matter. He opened the door for me. I walked out into the hallway and heard the door close behind me. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I sat alone in my sterile apartment, the nurse's sworn statement on the polished surface of my dining table. I could scan it, email it to the board and the press, and by morning Alistair Finch's career would be a smoking crater. But Leo's face was burned into my mind. Sending that email would only prove his father's story. It would make me the cold, vengeful monster Alistair had described. I remembered the words of that tired old nurse from so long ago, how kindness was a liability in this place. I had sacrificed my kindness to gain power, and in doing so, I had lost the only thing that made me feel human again. I had lost Leo. This victory felt like ashes. True justice was not about destroying one man. It was about destroying the system that built him, the system that protected him. I walked over to my computer and opened a new document. The title I had been working under for months was Finch's Destruction. I highlighted the words and deleted them. I typed a new title, The Finch Protocol. My hands were steady as I typed. I worked through the night building the protocol, not as an attack, but as a fortress. I used years of national data on surgical errors and malpractice trends to create a system of checks and balances that was impersonal, irrefutable, and completely unavoidable. It required automated data collection from every machine in the operating room, creating a permanent, unalterable digital record of every procedure. It established a non-retaliatory reporting system for near misses, and it tied a surgeon's operating privileges directly to their incident rates. The system that protected monsters would be rebuilt to hold them accountable. I did not know what Leo was doing. I could only hope that the man I had come to love was also a man who could not live with a lie. I had to build my plan as if he would never help me, but I left a space for him, a door unlocked in the structure of my argument. As I worked, I found my own proof. My new access allowed me to request the data logs from the third-party company that serviced the anesthesiology machines. The records were stored on a cloud server, far from the hospital's internal network. I found the file for Mrs. Gable's surgery and saw the immutable timestamp. The machine had been running for 15 minutes longer than the official record stated, a silent digital witness to the cover-up. I scheduled the emergency board meeting for the following afternoon, citing a critical liability issue that required their immediate attention. The morning of the meeting, I attached the anesthesiology log to an email and sent it to Leo's personal address. The message was short. You wanted the truth. It's in this room at 3 p.m. What you do with it is up to you. I hit send and then I shut down my computer and walked away. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cold space with a long polished table that reflected the gray sky outside. The board members sat in their large black chairs, their faces serious and impatient. Marcus Thorne gave me a slight nod as I set up my presentation. Alistair Finch was there, invited as the chief of surgery. He sat at the far end of the table looking confident and annoyed, a king holding court in his own throne room. I did not speak about him. I did not speak about Mrs. Gable. I presented my case using data and statistics, showing them charts that detailed a pattern of undocumented errors and near misses that originated from a single department. I laid out the financial and legal exposure the hospital faced. Then, I presented the solution. The Finch Protocol. I explained its mechanics calmly and rationally, framing it as a necessary evolution in patient safety and risk management. Alistair Finch laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that cut through the quiet room. "This is a bureaucratic witch hunt," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a solution in search of a problem, orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee with a psychotic vendetta." He was about to continue, to say my name, when the boardroom door opened. Leo walked in. He wore his white coat, and it was wrinkled. He looked like he had not slept in days. He walked to the table and looked at the board members, then his eyes settled on his father. "She's right." His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "I was there. I was a medical student observing the Gable surgery. I saw you drop the clamp." He placed a single folded piece of paper on the table. It was a sworn affidavit from the head nurse Alistair had fired. Alistair sneered, recovering quickly. He was looking at Marcus Thorne, the man who had buried my life 7 years ago. "You forgot about the NDA this woman signed, the one you drafted. This is all inadmissible." It was the first time I had truly smiled in that hospital. "I never signed it," I said to the silent room. "That was the choice you gave me. A lie or ruin. I chose ruin. There is no NDA." I turned my attention from his shocked face to the rest of the board. "You can face a class action lawsuit that will expose decades of systemic negligence, led by your star surgeon and confirmed by his own son. Or you can announce Dr. Finch's immediate retirement for health reasons and unanimously approve the new accountability protocol." I held their gaze, one by one. "The choice is yours." 6 months later, I stood on the hospital's rooftop garden. The Finch protocol was the new standard of care, and the quiet hum of the hospital below felt different, safer. I was no longer an avenger. I was a guardian. The air was cool and clean up here, high above the city. I heard footsteps and turned to see Leo. He stopped a few feet away from me. The space between us was filled with everything we had lost, but it was finally free of lies. He looked tired, but the sadness in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet strength. He took a step closer and reached for my hand. I took it. The trust between us was a fragile thing, but it was there. For the first time in 7 years, Elena Martin allowed herself to hope it was strong enough to rebuild. I was a caregiver again, not just to one patient, but to the entire hospital.